Well, Woodley's backing up. Wow, Koscheck is sweet. Oh! That's it. Now that's it. Tyron Woodley knocks out Josh Koscheck. Oh my goodness. Tyron pressing the action here, standing in the second. And Lawler, again, patient, just moving around, hands up. Oh, he tagged him. Big shot. That's it. Wow. Tyron Woodley is the new UFC welterweight champion of the world. Just like that.
You know, one of the things we saw on social media is that you showed some pictures of you training with Floyd Mayweather.
I mean, to get an opportunity to work out with Floyd Mayweather, he showed me stuff not specifically to defeat Jake, but to be a world-class boxer in general. Techniques, positions, placements, hand positioning, movements. In MMA, sometimes we waste energy. Sometimes we do a lot of shucking and jiving, and they don't have purpose. Everything I do, everything I throw is going to hurt. My feints are going to hurt. It's going to make his body shake to the point where he don't know what the fuck's going on. So you can say, I'm out to say anything. I'm from the show me stage. You got to show me. I've been in there. This ain't my first big stage.
Tyron Woodley is easily the most dangerous fighter Jake Paul has signed up to fight. A fast, explosive athlete with legitimate striking skills and terrifying one-punch knockout power. Compared to Jake's past opponents, Woodley has the best chance at disrupting the young YouTube star's boxing momentum and putting away the problem child once and for all. But how much of Woodley's striking skills will actually carry into a boxing match with Jake Paul? Is Woodley actually the more technical boxer than Jake? Or will he inevitably meet the same fate as his training partner and friend Ben Askren? Well, let's jump into this and find out. Real quick, this is Kiwi MMA, and if you're new here and enjoy combat sports breakdowns, especially on more unconventional fighters and matchups like YouTube boxers, then please subscribe to the channel below. And let me know in the comments what you think of Tyron Woodley's boxing. Is he more technical than Jake? Is he going to knock him out? I want to hear from you guys. Now without further ado, let's jump into this. So before we even get into the technical stuff, we just need to talk briefly about Woodley's athleticism in general because, frankly, in my opinion, this alone could possibly win him this fight. Because even at 39 years old and likely past his prime, Woodley is still one of the most fast twitch athletes you'll ever see. And by fast twitch, what we mean is Woodley possesses more type 2 muscle fibers, which use anaerobic metabolism to create fuel, and so therefore they're better at generating short bursts of strength or speed than, say, slow muscle fibers. But they do fatigue more quickly as a result. So someone who has more of these type 2 muscle fibers is going to be better at more fast, explosive activities, such as sprinting or powerlifting, for example. And coincidentally, Woodley, one of the most fast twitch athletes in the world, is extremely explosive and fast. And this affects all of Woodley's movements within combat sports, from not just the way he punches, but also his feints, as well as his hand speed and his footwork, the way he blitzes opponents down to cover ground really quickly, but also defensively when, say, he's reacting to his opponent's feints, or he's trying to parry, or he's trying to counter, for example. Everything Woodley does is fast, and when you couple that with his heavily muscled frame, but of course he's not a bodybuilder, he has good kinetic chain, he's got good fluidity in his punches, good snappiness, and of course they say power is velocity times force. There's a reason why Tyron Woodley's power punches are known as T-Wood bombs. And this is something that Jake Paul has never come up against, a legitimate athletic specimen who's fine-tuned his natural abilities into combat sports, specifically striking. Right, Nate Robinson was an athlete and was also fast twitch and explosive, but since he lacked the technical skills and understanding of boxing, he basically used his abilities to mainly clinch and bum rush and got punished for it. On the other hand, you had someone like Ben Askren who was slow twitch and didn't have that same speed and explosiveness and power as Woodley. So even though he landed a nice counter right overhand against Jake in their fight, he didn't have the power to really make Jake respect him, and so therefore he didn't have that one-punch equalizer. So that's one huge difference about Tyron Woodley compared to Jake's past opponents, in that Tyron Woodley can end this fight in one punch. Jake's past opponents couldn't do that. Right, I bet Tyron Woodley's counter overhand is probably going to sting just a little bit more than his friend Ben Askren. And when we couple that with the fact that Jake's chin is untested and we don't know how he's able to react to heavy power shots like this, and even if the way Woodley sets the shot up, maybe throwing it naked or just blitzing forward, isn't the most fundamental way of doing it according to boxing, his raw speed and power may just be able to compensate. But how does Woodley actually use this athleticism within combat sports? Well, for anyone here who hasn't followed Woodley's career, he's mainly known for his right hand, specifically his right overhand. And everything he does basically revolves around landing it. Now, typically Woodley lands his right hand in two ways. Offensively, it's usually a feint coupled with an explosive blitz, whereas defensively, it's usually a pullback counter where he tries to get the opponent to fall into his right hand. Let's focus on Woodley's offensive blitz first, and I'm going to focus mainly on his setups against orthodox fighters given the fact that Jake is also orthodox. So a perfect example of this would be his debut knockout in the UFC over Jay Huron. And what Woodley's trying to do in these blitzing sequences is he's trying to distract the opponent's hand that's on the same side as his overhand. So since Tyron is orthodox, his left hand is going to be the best defense against Woodley's right overhand, specifically his left guard, so Woodley needs to find a way to get around it. So even before Woodley blitzes, he just flicks out his right hand to get the reaction out of Jay Huron. He then immediately launches forward and feints a Superman punch jab. Now Huron reacts to this by parrying with his right hand down the middle, but this is what Woodley wants because he wants to go around the middle and land over the top of Huron's left hand. So the feint was simply meant to draw Huron's attention towards the middle so Woodley could land the right hand over the side. Now Huron probably would have been okay here if he just moved back and used his left guard, but if you notice, Woodley has a speed advantage, so he's moving so quickly, Huron then tries to extend it out to probe with his left hand just so he can kind of feel where Woodley's coming, but by that point it's too late. So as he extends his left hand out, Woodley's able to land the right overhand right where he wants it. Now, admittedly, this is MMA, and the distance and setups are definitely different than boxing, so do I think Woodley's going to throw a Superman punch feint against Jake Paul? No, but it's just to give you an idea of the kind of feints and setups Woodley uses to land the right overhand. Another example that's less exaggerated would be in the Josh Koscheck fight, where Woodley throws his right uppercut into a right overhand combination. So again, Woodley needs to get around or at least distract the lead hand so he can land the right overhand over the top of it. So here Woodley darts forward quickly and leads with the right uppercut to get Josh to parry it with his left hand. Now, of course, Josh has to drop his left hand to parry, so there's an opening there for the right overhand, which Woodley's able to land clean and knock him down. Now, while the Chosen One has found success with these blitzing techniques in MMA, they could be considered pretty defensively unsound at times. Like in this example, leading with the right uppercut will completely expose your head. Right, Koscheck could have intercepted Woodley here by simply throwing a jab or a right hand. But Woodley's able to compensate for this using his speed and explosiveness, because the second Koscheck parries, Woodley's able to quickly throw that right overhand. But someone more slow twitch like a Nate Diaz probably wouldn't be able to land the follow-up shot. So yeah, not the most defensively sound way of setting up the right overhand, but Woodley makes it work. But Woodley also finds success in how he counters with the right hand, and probably the best example of this was in the Darren Till fight. Now Till wasn't southpaw here, but Woodley could still make this pull counter work against an orthodox opponent. So Till comes forward and fakes a lead right uppercut, which he then extends into a long jab. And Woodley is already well ahead of him here as he pulls back immediately, which draws Till in even closer. Right, because if Till lands the jab here, the impact from the punch would have stopped the momentum of him from going forward, but by pulling on the punch, Till's jab is extended forward to its maximum distance, which consequentially is drawing Till further into Woodley's right hand. Now Till tries to continue forward with the left straight, but Woodley intelligently throws the right hand overhand counter while keeping his chin down and moving his head to the left off the center line to avoid the left hand just in case. And once again, the T-Wood bomb hits its mark clean. Now I know Woodley worked with Mayweather recently, and maybe this is something they might have went over and maybe fine-tuned with his team. Obviously Mayweather was one of the greatest pull counter artists in the game, and given Woodley's success using this counter, maybe this is something they could have went over and worked on. Against an orthodox opponent like Jake, Woodley could potentially pull back if Jake, say, throws a lazy jab, and then like Mayweather counter with the right hand and dip away from the punch. But Woodley's most devastating counter example is probably his carriage block right hook against Josh Koscheck. So Koscheck is pressuring Woodley up against the cage, and this is another example of where, like the Darren Till fight, Woodley's opponent's lack of distance awareness and defense helps him out. So Josh throws the right with no setup, completely plants himself in space and has no left guard up, and he doesn't dip or slip away anywhere after throwing the punch. And Woodley has Josh right where he needs him to fall into his right hand. So all he does is guard up on his left side by placing his bicep to his temple. He then turns away from Josh's right hand and counters with a devastating right hook which lands perfectly on the chin. While I'm sure Jake's setups and attacks will be a little bit less telegraphed than Josh Koscheck's, I can't help but be reminded in this sequence of some of Jake's more telegraphed attacks against the ropes versus Nate Robinson and Ben Askren, for example. Throwing wild overhands against the fence at Nate Robinson with very little setup or defense. Or like in the Ben Askren fight where he just threw out a left hook while pressuring Ben and was actually countered with the right overhand, the exact same punch that Woodley's always looking for. It makes you wonder how someone like Woodley with legitimate power and timing would have done in these situations. Now, we pointed out some of Woodley's more successful setups and counters with his right hand, but there are also some times where he'll just throw it out there with little setups at all or completely naked. Almost like he's some YouTube boxer we've all heard of. So against Dong-Yeon Kim, for example, while moving backwards, he just plants and throws it out there, which leads to the finish. Or against Vicente Luque, where he moves forward, feints a jab real quickly, and then just throws it out, looking to land it through the opening in Luque's guard. And sometimes this works, like in the Dong-Yeon Kim fight, but also the early stages of the Luque fight. But oftentimes Woodley gets punished badly for this kind of offense, like in the Gilbert Burns fight when he was countered with the left hook on the inside while trying to wing the right overhand out. And speaking of getting countered, this might be a good time to talk about some of Woodley's other punches besides the right overhand and maybe his right hook. Because this begs the question, does Woodley have much more variety in his punching selection besides the right hook and the right overhand? And the answer is, not really, or at least we could say not to the point where any of these other punches are particularly effective for him. Let's talk about his right uppercut for starters. You'd think this might be a good punch for Woodley to use, but the Luque fight showed us otherwise. And the problem with this punch for Woodley in this fight was, he really wasn't at the right range to land this punch effectively. Now, to explain, it's not that you can't land the rear uppercut at a further range, you're just going to potentially leave your head more exposed if you throw it farther away and if you're reaching for it. Right, it's typically more safe to throw the uppercut at a close range because at a shorter distance, the less chance there is to reach for it and telegraph it, and the better chance you have of making it a more short, precise strike you can throw quickly and then get away. Now, not only does Woodley throw it at a further range, he's also reaching for it and then completely drops his right hand, which telegraphs the crap out of the shot. Luque then evades the shot, moving his head off the center line away from the right uppercut, and then while throwing a nice right overhand which rocks Woodley badly. Now, in contrast, he did have some success with the right cross against Luque in their fight, right, because Luque was guarding up so tight to anticipate the right overhand, he left himself more exposed down the middle, so Woodley caught him with a nice combo here, jab, right hand down the middle, and then he'd finish with a left hook and then duck and move away to his left on the same side he threw the hook. But then again, Woodley got caught using this exact same right cross against Gilbert Burns in the opening exchanges of their fight. Now, the difference here was Woodley didn't set up his right hand and just decided to throw it naked, while at the same time leaving his chin up and not utilizing a left guard, and his head was right in the path of Burns' beautifully placed right overhand. So the counters are definitely there against Woodley, even if he's throwing straight punches. And coincidentally, guess who also has a pretty good right hand counter? And as far as Woodley's lead hand punches go, I mean, they're pretty forgettable. Against Burns, he was trying to throw a lot of body jabs, but none of these really landed to great effect due to the farther distance in MMA, so Woodley mainly was reaching for them. Other than that, Woodley's jab in general is mainly just used to set up his right hand, and he doesn't really tend to fully commit to them. He did also get pull countered himself by throwing a fast jab against Wonderboy in their fight. And then as far as his left hook goes, I mean, pretty non-existent here as well. I was able to find one example of him leading with a gazelle left hook against Gilbert Burns, but the setup and execution was just pretty slow and sloppy. So yeah, Tyron's going to need to broaden his arsenal a little bit against Jake because he can't come into this fight completely one-dimensional. Especially in a boxing contest where he can't just blast low leg kicks or go for a double leg takedown. And this leads to our last section. How about his footwork and defense? Does Woodley bring much to the table in this department? Well, for starters, he's shown a solid ability to parry his opponent's lead jab with his rear right hand, such as in the early stages of the Gilbert Burns fight. Right in this fight, Woodley came out with a probing right hand looking to intercept Burns' jab and frustrate his setups, and it actually worked for certain portions of the fight. As far as utilizing a high guard, he doesn't tend to use his left guard that much, but he did find some success in using it, of course in the Josh Koscheck knockout, but also in the Wonderboy fight where Wonderboy was fighting in southpaw. And he'll often keep up a right high guard when circling away from exchanges in case of any incoming strikes. As far as defense when he's on the attack, we kind of already talked about this, but as we pointed out before, Woodley has been punished for lacking defense when throwing strikes and not getting his head off the center line at times, as well as leaving his chin up and not dipping away after throwing punches. He also doesn't tend to keep a right high guard up when throwing strikes, especially when he's throwing his power hand. And like most MMA fighters, he also utilizes a lot of posting retreating defenses, extending out with his lead hand and then galloping back to safety. As far as his footwork, it's a pretty standard affair, mainly just galloping backwards, L-stepping, circling out to reset the action, and his favorite, using lateral movement to scale the cage so he can look for a counter. The problem is, oftentimes Woodley intentionally backs himself up, and when he does this, it's caused him some problems in the past, such as in the Rory McDonald fight and the Gilbert Burns fight. As I said before, when Woodley's backed up and fighters throw more one-dimensional punches and setups at him that Woodley can anticipate, such as Till's left straight or Koscheck's right hand, Woodley can find the counters pretty effectively. But against Rory McDonald, for example, who was mixing it up by, say, jabbing to the head and then jabbing to the body, and then doing the same with his right hands, Woodley had a lot more trouble dealing with the more varied attack. Right, he would be able to, say, parry Rory's initial jab pretty effectively, but afterwards he would kind of get stuck not knowing what Rory's next attack would be. And Rory would start to exploit this. He would, say, throw the jab at Woodley, who would start to parry it, and that would open him up to the body and set up for his next strike. And the lack of one-dimensional and singular attacks really caused Woodley to pause up and hesitate really badly. And with Tyron stuck in the mud like this allowed Rory to put on a jabbing clinic, as well as landing some nice right hands to the head and body. Yet again another example where the right overhand lands on Woodley and his left guard is down once again. And we also need to talk about Woodley's susceptibility to reacting to his opponent's feints, with the Gilbert Burns fight being the best example of this. Because while McDonald was simply pumping out jabs which got Woodley to freeze up so bad, Burns was feinting in ways that were a lot more anxiety-provoking. In terms of his boxing feints, he was faking jabs, getting Woodley to parry, which led to openings, feinting the right overhand, feinting down low, in this case for takedowns, but this could also work in a boxing match for, say, faking jabs to the body, habituating Woodley into thinking an attack was coming one way and then coming the complete opposite way. But Burns' most effective feints were just the constant subtle movements he would do throughout the fight that completely kept Woodley on edge. Stuff like shifting his head and upper body towards Woodley, or just faking like he was moving forward, which constantly kept him guessing. And it got to the point where, once again, Woodley would either become completely paralyzed in front of Burns and just stand in front of him, or he'd start reacting to the feints by, say, backing up, which got him caught by follow-up attacks. And sometimes Woodley would get so suffocated from this he would try to explode forward with one of his blitzing combinations, but all this did would further telegraph Woodley's right-hand attacks, making him an easy target to counter. Now coincidentally, Jake was able to employ a similar game plan against Nate Robinson, where he would feint at Nate to trigger him to explode forward and bum rush Jake, which led to the right-hand counters. Now, to be clear, obviously Woodley's blitzing right-hand setups and Nate's bum rushing are two completely different things. Right, Nate wasn't even really throwing anything here, and he was kind of just running forward into Jake's right hand. Woodley actually has some feints, some shuffling footwork, a lot more trickery to land the right hand, as well as some insane speed to cover ground. But he still leaves himself very exposed when he does this, and the muscle memory is always going to be there, so I won't be surprised if he ends up getting countered by Jake doing this out of instinct. But overall, that's an overview of Woodley's boxing as we've seen it in MMA and how it potentially collides with Jake's style. Overall, Woodley is still a dangerous fighter and athlete with definitely a lot more boxing potential than his training partner Ben Askren. But even as one of the more accomplished knockout artists in MMA, we still have to keep in mind that a lot of the bad boxing habits that he got away with in the UFC will definitely cause him problems under the boxing rule set if he can't correct them. The good news is Woodley seems to be aware of this, as evidenced by his comments from training with Floyd Mayweather.
I mean, to get an opportunity to work out with Floyd Mayweather, he showed me stuff not specifically to defeat Jake, but to be a world-class boxer in general. Techniques, positions, placements, hand positioning, movements. In MMA, sometimes we waste energy. Sometimes we do a lot of shucking and jiving, and they don't have purpose.
So it's definitely a positive thing to hear from Woodley, and hopefully he's able to correct these bad habits at the end of training camp. In particular, I expect for him to especially tighten up his boxing defense, work on closing the distance in more subtle ways rather than just exploding forward, and developing his counter game a lot during this camp. Because remember, Jake Paul has a lot of boxing defensive problems as well, perhaps something we'll talk about in a future video. But ultimately, even if Woodley can't fix these technical flaws, he still has that one-punch equalizer, and who knows, maybe that alone will be enough. But what do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in comments below. And once again, this is Kiwi MMA, over and out.